Group Session 20, Self-Compassion and Self-Care. Quote, I don't really like the idea of self-compassion. Just the word makes me feel uncomfortable. End quote. Belinda. Some might imagine that the topics of self-compassion and self-care would be easier than other areas in this program. It can be for certain individuals, but these topics can feel challenging for a surprising number of people who experience childhood harm. If your response to this chapter is one of enthusiasm, that's fine, but if these topics feel uncomfortable, this is common. As we shall explore, there are several reasons why many can be slow to warm to this material. Also, for some people, the ideas of self compassion and self care can seem strangely new. This experience was captured well by Robert, an individual we mentioned earlier who had experienced significant childhood neglect. His clinician had spent some time describing self compassion and self care and had noticed a bemused expression on his face. The clinician asked Robert what he thought about these topics. His response was interesting, if not humorous. Quote, I don't know. Nervous laughter. I've never really thought about this stuff. End quote. To provide some orientation, we offer brief definitions of self compassion and self care below. The rest of the chapter represents an opportunity to explore these areas in detail, as well as develop your capacity for self compassion and self care. Self compassion includes acknowledging mistakes or lapses in judgment, but also means relating to yourself with kindness, soothing, and encouragement. Self compassion is an internal experience. It involves how you think about or talk to yourself. Self care is the capacity to look after your physical and psychological well being. It involves behaviors, what you do to care for your body and organize your life or relationships. Self compassion. There are countless ways in which human beings can get things wrong. Whether we are aware or unaware of our behavior, we sometimes cause upset or inconvenience to others. Or, sometimes, when we believe we have fallen short, it's not something we did to someone else, it's because we feel we have not lived up to our own standards. But whether we believe we have caused harm to others or fallen short of our standards, everyone makes mistakes, gets things wrong, or screws up. The British poet Alexander Pope put it more succinctly: to err is human. Does the simple fact that human beings make mistakes have any special relevance concerning childhood trauma? It turns out it does. While those who experienced childhood harm share in the human experience of making mistakes, there is evidence that they are much more likely to relate to themselves negatively when they do make mistakes. In fact, one of the key diagnostic criteria for complex post traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, is negative self concept. Punitive self talk is both a cause and a consequence of having a negative self concept. In other words, while such individuals make mistakes like everyone else, they are more likely to be self judgmental in ways which can induce feelings such as worthlessness, guilt, or shame. So, how does this work in practice? Relationships come in three different forms: our relationship to the world, others, and ourselves. The practice of self compassion relates most intimately to the relationship you have with yourself. For some people who experienced childhood harm, the idea that they have a relationship with themselves is something they haven't given much thought to. This can sometimes be a consequence of a history of neglect. As you go through the day, thoughts go through your head, and some of these thoughts involve how you think about or talk to yourself. This can be referred to as self talk, and everyone does it. As mentioned, there is evidence that people who experience childhood abuse or neglect tend to be more punishing in how they think about or talk to themselves. We mentioned Bertrand previously, an individual who was physically and emotionally abused by his father. Bertrand had avoided opening a letter which contained a parking citation, which resulted in a £40 penalty. Quote, I'm such an effing idiot. How stupid can I possibly be? I am constantly doing this shit. End quote. If Bertrand had experienced a moment of annoyance with himself over his mistake, that would be one thing. But he had spent a lot of time punishing himself in the 3 days before we spoke with him. And, interestingly, Bertrand wasn't constantly doing this shit, as he put it. He was normally a fairly organized guy. His reaction represented some very punitive self talk and difficulties accessing self compassion. Why do people struggle to be self compassionate? The skill of self compassion is not difficult to understand, but for many who experienced childhood harm, it feels difficult to actually do it. To have some confidence in self compassion, it's often necessary to understand the part of you that is likely to be resistant. Below, we explore 4 reasons why those who experienced childhood trauma can struggle to practice self compassion. 1. Misunderstanding what is meant by self compassion. Some people see self compassion as unacceptable because they think it means being irresponsible. For example, being able to say or do whatever you want, or letting yourself off the hook for your mistakes. Being selfish. Being weak. Seeing self compassion as the same thing as self pity. Let's return to our definition of self compassion. Self compassion includes acknowledging mistakes or lapses in judgment, but also means relating to yourself with kindness, soothing, and encouragement. Notice that a feature of self compassion includes having the strength and sensitivity to appreciate and learn from your mistakes. So, this is not about being irresponsible, selfish, or weak. Associating self compassion with weakness was exemplified by John, who was physically abused by his father throughout childhood. Quote, this self compassionate stuff, it just seems so wet. When I try doing it, I feel sort of pathetic. End quote. Also, when people use the word self pity, they usually are referring to someone who is feeling sorry for themselves for reasons which are not justified. That's not self compassion. Self compassion means relating to yourself with kindness, soothing, and encouragement in circumstances where this is necessary and healthy. 2. The internalization of the abuser's voice. Emotional abuse represents an attack on the child's sense of self. In an unconscious manner, people who experienced childhood harm can internalize the voice of the abuser. In other words, they can talk to themselves in a similar way that the abuser used to talk to them. When you talk to yourself in a punishing way, it probably sounds like your voice, but if you pay attention, you may notice that it sounds similar to how an abuser used to speak to you. Mark was emotionally abused for years by his father. An auto mechanic, one day he left a toolbox out in the rain, which resulted in tools collecting some rust. Quote, I hate making mistakes. I'm so stupid. Why am I such a loser? End quote. Mark's therapist replied, Quote, so this idea that you are stupid, that you are a loser, whose voice does that sound like? End quote. The look of recognition on Mark's face was immediate. Mark had internalized his father's voice, and now he was very adept at punishing himself severely for many mistakes. 3. The belief that you are supposed to be punished. Self compassion often doesn't feel right for people who were harmed as children, an issue that can be compounded if they experience further abuse as an adult. Many such people seem to carry around with them a sense that they are bad and are supposed to be punished. Barbara experienced childhood neglect as well as physical and emotional abuse. Quote, I swear, even if something isn't really my fault, I still feel responsible. Self compassion feels weird because I just sort of feel like I'm supposed to be punished. End quote. If you experienced harm that was punishing in childhood, it doesn't mean you are supposed to be punished for the rest of your life. Other people should not continue punishing you, and you don't need to punish yourself. The past doesn't have to be the present and the future. With this in mind, self compassion becomes possible. 4. You were never shown or taught how to be self compassionate. From a developmental perspective, children are inexperienced, their brains are underdeveloped, and they are physically clumsy. All of this means that they will make thousands of mistakes and messes before they arrive at adulthood. Whether a child learns the value and skill of self compassion depends greatly on what they see in childhood and how others respond to their mistakes. An 8-year-old receives a D on a math test at school and is upset with herself. She is speaking with her mother below. Child, quote, I'm useless at math. I can't do any of it. Next, we are doing division, and that's even harder. End quote. Mother, quote, you really revised for that test. English comes easy for you, but math just seems trickier. But I'm sure you will learn it, and I can help. You're trying, and that's what's important. You shouldn't be so hard on yourself. End quote. By being compassionate with her daughter, this mother is teaching the skill of self compassion. We learn how to relate to ourselves through how others relate to us. If a child has adults around them who are compassionate and supportive, they learn to be compassionate and supportive with themselves. We internalize the behaviors and thoughts of others and make them our behaviors and thoughts. How I relate to myself will reflect the way others related to me. Sadly, this is also true in the case of abuse and neglect. If the mother above had responded to her daughter's test score of a D with verbal abuse and shaming, the child is likely to learn that self punishment and shame are necessary when she makes mistakes or falls short. Also, some people watched an important adult relate to themselves punitively. A child can learn from watching others that beating up on yourself psychologically or even physically seems necessary. Exercise 1. Why might self compassion be difficult for you? We have explored 4 reasons why self compassion may not come naturally to people who experienced childhood harm. Take any you think help explain why self compassion can be difficult for you. Please pause the audio and complete exercise 1 in the guidebook. The skill of self compassion. The idea that self compassion is a skill might sound odd. However, like Cooking, driving a car, or repairing a computer, it requires some knowledge, and you need to do something in a clever way. The initial step in self compassion requires that you recognize and let go of its opposite, the self punitive loop. We need to say a bit about what this is. The self punitive loop has two features. One, punishing yourself inwardly through self talk for some period of time in ways which induce feelings like worthlessness, shame, or guilt. These thoughts feel like a loop because you are stuck in them, or they keep reoccurring. Two, if you pay close attention to the self punitive loop, you will notice there is no practical benefit or resolution unless making yourself feel terrible is seen as a benefit, which we would not agree with. The nature of self punishing thoughts is that they don't help you or others. Below is a description of the skill of self compassion, but we need to make a few points. First, the issue requiring self compassion may have occurred 2 minutes ago or 20 years ago. It doesn't matter. Second, sometimes you will find yourself in a self punitive loop because of a mistake you made. Other times, it's because someone criticized you. Such criticism represents an invitation for you to be self punitive. In either event, self compassion can be equally important. Third, as mentioned above, knowing how to practice self compassion is not that complicated, and it's not what gets in the way. The blocks to being self compassionate have more to do with the issues outlined in the previous section entitled Why Do People Struggle to Be Self Compassionate? It's those issues that are driving you away from self compassion and towards the self punitive loop. To practice self compassion, it's necessary to accept that self compassion is a good idea. The skill of self compassion involves 4 steps. 1. Recognize that you are experiencing a self punitive loop. Be aware of self punishing thoughts. You might be experiencing punishing self talk about something you did, something which happened between you and others, or even just thoughts or impulses you have had. If you are thinking in ways that induce guilt, shame, or worthlessness, that's a clue. If you can recognize the self punitive loop in a few seconds, that's great. If you have been in a self punitive loop for a while before you spotted it, that's better than not seeing it at all. 2. See the big picture and appreciate why you may have acted or thought as you did. If you made a mistake, acted insensitively, or didn't live up to your expectations, there can be mitigating reasons or circumstances. Perhaps you didn't have certain information, misunderstood something, were tired or distracted, or your history of complex trauma played a role, etc. This is not about being irresponsible or shifting blame. It's about appreciating your human fallibility. 3. Can you learn from the situation or make something right? You might be able to learn something from your situation about yourself and how you want to do things in the future. Or, if you recognize you have made a mistake or fallen short, sometimes you can make a repair, e.g., offering an apology or sorting something out. If there is something you can learn from the situation, you can decide to try and do things differently in the future. If you can mend something between you and others, you can make a decision to do this. 4. Apply a healthy dose of self-compassion. You have spotted a self-punitive loop, explored why you acted or thought as you did, and tried to learn from and, if possible, repair your situation. There is nothing else you can do. So it's time to be self-compassionate. This means talking to yourself with kindness, soothing, or encouragement. If this sounds unlikely, ridiculous, or even impossible, the journaling below, which 3 individuals did, may help. The first illustrates a current situation, the second occurred many years ago, and the third relates to an internal event. Tom's son misses one of his classes. Tom normally drops his son off at secondary school on the way to work. He was about to wake up his son and check his diary. He realized that he had an unusual meeting scheduled first thing, which meant he couldn't drop his son off, and his son would have to take a bus. This results in his son missing his first lesson, which he journaled. Please pause the audio and review Journal 1 in the guidebook. One interesting point about the journaling Tom did is how counterproductive the self-punitive loop can be. When caught up in self-punishing thoughts and images, you elicit painful emotional states like anxiety, anger, or shame. In this state of mind, it's very hard to think productively, such as seeing the big picture, thinking about what can be learned, or whether a repair can be made. Karen punishes herself over an accident occurring many years ago. When Karen's son was 10 years old, he was jumping on a trampoline in their garden and broke his arm. Her son is now 22, and the arm mended a long time ago, but there is an obvious bump where the bone calcified, which Karen can see when he wears short-sleeved shirts. Please pause the audio and review Journal 2 in the guidebook. Mary punishes herself for violent thoughts which come into her head. Mary experienced physical abuse throughout childhood. It's very confusing for her, but she can have vivid thoughts or images of doing something violent to others which pop into her head. She has never been violent to anyone and is confident she won't, but the violent thoughts or images are very upsetting. Please pause the audio and review Journal 3 in the guidebook. Exercise 2. Journaling your use of self-compassion. Self-compassion is more than an idea. It's a skill you can use. Below is a blank journal you can fill in to help you use self-compassion. When you spot that you are getting into a self-punitive loop, that's the time to use the journal. If you like, you can make a photocopy of the journal and take it with you in a purse or pocket. There are 2 important points to keep in mind. First, some individuals will say, I didn't journal anything because I didn't get into any serious self-punitive loops. On exploration, we often discover there were a number of times they needed to use self-compassion. The issue doesn't have to be serious to require self-compassion. Second, the nature of the self-punitive loop is that it's a loop. Even when you see it for what it is and pour a dose of healthy self-compassion on it, the self-punitive thoughts or images often reoccur. What should you do? See it for what it is and use the skill of self-compassion again and again and again and again. You may have to use the skill of self-compassion many times before self-punitive thoughts ease off. Remember, self-punishment is not making you more insightful, it's not helpful, and it's not necessary. You have already received more punishment than you ever deserved. It's okay to be self-compassionate. You deserve to be self-compassionate. Please pause the audio and review Journal 4. Please fill out this journal whenever necessary to support you in responding to situations that require a self-compassionate response. Self-care. Some individuals feel an impulse to skip this section, and occasionally this is because they have come across information on self-care that was off-putting. A lot of the available information on self-care, especially on the internet, can come across as simplistic, condescending, or annoying, and often consists of lists of direct advice giving. Our view is that self-care is an essential area for individuals to explore, but we will not be providing a pick and mix list of self-care ideas. Instead, we will look at this topic in some depth, providing you with a questionnaire, and then encourage you to explore what is needed. We trust that you will know if changes need to be made for better self-care and how to make them. What is self-care and why is it important? Self-compassion and self-care can overlap and support one another, but they are different. Self-compassion means generating inner thoughts that are kind, soothing, and supportive to yourself. Self-care is the capacity to look after your well-being, but it involves behaviors. It's what you do to care for your body and organize life and relationships. Do issues of self-care have any special relevance for people who experienced childhood harm? As was the case with self-compassion, the answer is yes, it does. There is evidence that those who were abused or neglected are more likely to experience a broad range of medical issues resulting from inadequate self-care. If this worries you, there are a couple of reassuring points to be made. First, while the research tells us that such individuals are more at risk for medical problems than the general population, this does not mean it will apply to you, as there are always many exceptions to any general research finding. Second, if you can identify that your self-care is inadequate and putting you at risk for problems, you can begin making changes now that will protect you or help repair certain issues that may be developing. Why might those who experienced childhood harm be vulnerable to poor self-care? There are at least a couple of reasons why those who experienced childhood harm may not do a good job of self-care, and you will notice some overlap with a similar section on self-compassion. 1. We learn self-care through being cared for. Children require care when they get sick or scrape their knees. They need to be supported in brushing their teeth and having regular bedtimes. They need to be provided with nutritious food, opportunities for play and rest, etc. All of this and more should be supported consistently by caring adults. When it is, children are shown what caring for their bodies and minds looks like, and they learn that they deserve good care. Because their bodies and minds got cared for as children, they internalize a model of what good care looks and feels like. As adults, this internal model of good care expresses itself in the capacity to care for themselves, self-care. Put simply, through being cared for as a child, you acquire the skills of self-care and the sense that you deserve good care. If your body and mind didn't get cared for by adults around you, you are less likely to have a clear grasp of what good self-care looks and feels like. 2. Painful states of emotional dysregulation can result in poor self-care. In a previous chapter on emotions, we saw that people who experience childhood harm are more likely to encounter painful emotional states, emotional dysregulation, and that more extreme emotional states seem to require more extreme ways of coping. These ways of coping can include, for example, drug and alcohol abuse, junk food binging or food restriction, overexercise, overwork, self harming, etc. If developed into a pattern of coping, these sorts of behaviors can represent poor self care. Kelly experienced childhood sexual abuse and neglect and struggled with a mix of anxiety and depression. Quote, I know drinking 15 cans of Coke a day is bad for me, and I worry about my teeth, but it's this habit I've got into. When I feel bad, I just pop open a can without even thinking about it. End quote. Whether an individual reaches for alcohol, drugs, junk food, or behaves in self harmful ways, they are often just trying to get control over painful emotional states which have roots in childhood experiences. Exercise 3. Why might you struggle with self care? Please pause the audio and complete exercise 3 in the guidebook. Exercise 4. Questionnaire for self care. The questionnaire below asks what may feel like quite personal questions, and there is a risk that some may feel patronized by the nature of this exercise. This occurs occasionally, and if it feels somewhat patronizing, we are sorry. However, we have kept this exercise in the program because of the significant number of people we work with who can really struggle with self care. Write a number next to each question which rates your experience for each area. Please pause the audio and complete exercise 4 in the guidebook. Final thought. People can have very different experiences concerning this chapter. Some may discover they are not doing too badly concerning self compassion and self care. But it's not unusual for us to work with people who discover that these areas represent significant problems. Some clients can even feel rather shocked by how difficult self compassion and self care are for them. If you have discovered that you really struggle with these areas, we encourage you not to beat up on yourself or get despondent about it. There will be genuine reasons why these areas are so difficult, and working at change will take time, reflection, and practice. This ends the audio for the chapter on self compassion and self care.